Hi guys, before today's episode I wanted to give you a very quick overview of this Lisbon Cultural Changemaker series. I am of course your host and founder of the Interpreting Wine podcast, Lawrence Francis. The idea for this series grew out of the fact that although I'm based in London, I'm getting called upon increasingly to cover the hospitality scene overseas. And I wondered what would it be like if I expanded the format out, featuring cultural changemakers not only in food and drink but also in other fields, and produced a series of interviews almost like an audio travel guide that would allow you to listen in advance and hit the ground knowing some of the important cultural changes happening in the city. And this is my very first ever series of this kind covering Lisbon. These 5 episodes will air in sequence from 284 to 288 on the Interpreting Wine podcast. And of course, if you or anyone else that you know is going to be visiting this fantastic city, please do point them in this direction so they can hear it for themselves. And without further ado, here is today's episode of Interpreting Wine's Cultural Changemaker series, Lisbon Summer 2019. Today's episode of the podcast marks the start of the Cultural Changemaker Lisbon Summer 2019 series, featuring Nicolai Sarbib of the THIRDBASE Artist Residency Program. In this episode, Nicolai gives us an overview of the project itself, discusses the artists who have passed through the doors of THIRDBASE, offers recommendations for things to see outside of the city, as well as discussing some of his favourite neighbourhoods to visit inside of the city. Enjoy.
When I first found out about this project was because I was working for a company that we did the graphic design for this hotel. So the investors wanted to open a hotel that was focused on contemporary arts, a space that would be always evolving, that could be a platform where guests basically come to stay in Lisbon and they get to, through the hotel, also get to know more about Lisbon culturally, about contemporary arts, museums, galleries. And the hotel has a service where we guide you through this kind of experience in Lisbon. And it wasn't just enough that we had this guest experience, but we wanted the hotel to actually be a platform for guests to experience contemporary art. So the idea was to have a studio within the hotel where artists can come and work, and the artwork that's displayed in the hotel or different things that are site-specific for the hotel are created within the hotel. And it creates this whole experience where the guests that come to stay in Lisbon are also part of this experience of an artist that's coming to stay in Lisbon, and it's part of the hotel. He's working in the hotel, and it's an evolving situation. So there was a small team in Paris of artists that came up with this concept and that worked on this concept for a few months and figured out some of the ins and outs and the basic concept behind it, the idea to how many artists should come, how this would work, what would make it more interesting and for the guests, and what kind of artwork would make sense for this hotel. There's a few hotels that work in this kind of sense of inviting artists, but not in the same way. We wanted to make it also about the experience, not just for the guests of the hotel, but also for the artists, and to be something where it's you're giving back something to artists in the sense where we take no commission off pieces or anything like this. So I found out about the project because I was working with a company that did all the graphic branding and things for the hotel, and I knew they would need somebody to set this project up in Lisbon that knew the right people, that knew about Lisbon culturally, so that could create this, take this idea further in Lisbon. And ended up, I was the right person for the job, I guess. And so here we are. And so far we've had 3 seasons where we've had 4 artists each season that comes to Lisbon, working on different mediums, from sculpture to painting, photography, video. And we give them an apartment to stay, so we have accommodation for the artists. We have our studio space where we have some tools, different kinds of tools for artists, and they get a budget for their specific needs on whatever project they're working on. And by the end of 4 months, we get to do an exhibition with all their work at the studio, And the idea is all the pieces are created for site specifically for different rooms in the hotel. So gradually, as we have more and more artists, the pieces can get changed gradually through time in the hotel room. So you could stay in the hotel this year, and next year the same room, completely different, made by a different artist.
Genuinely, really impressed with the idea. And, I know that we're sitting here now in the pop-up and we're not yet in the finished hotel, but, hopefully next time we'll meet again. We'll be over there in the hotel. And you've just given me a, very brief tour of the facilities and the space downstairs. What I'm really curious about are the artists themselves. So that, the people who you've already had coming through. I mean, I think it's really interesting that, there isn't the hotel ready for them to see yet. They may be coming in at an early stage. I'm just curious about, who do you think this idea is attracting now in terms of, at this sort of early stage, at this sort of, potentially quite disruptive stage in the sort of art space and in the hotel space of Lisbon, and what have been some of the things that I guess sort of most impressed you and have maybe most surprised you about who's been coming through the doors and coming over for that 3 or 4 month period over here?
Well, we've had an enormous variety of people and different people who work very differently, very different backgrounds, and that was also part of our objective. So I think we started the first season with 4 artists, different ages. So we had 2 young artists, one from London, a girl, Divine, from London, and another artist from Paris that had just finished Central St. Martin's. So they were quite young artists. And we had 2 more established artists that came from the United States. One that was working mostly video and photography, and another artist who worked different mediums. And that was our first season. So it was the first experience. We were still also learning through the process, and it was great. We had a great 4 months. As I said, it was a learning curve. But I think most people so far that have, we're on our 3rd season right now. So I think most people that have applied have a genuine wish not only to progress in terms of their work or to experiment, but I think the resident being 4 months also gives you, for artists, it's a great period of time. It's a long period of time to be able to experiment. And I think most people have a desire of having this experience where they can go work somewhere else, experience the culture. So I think a great part of the attractiveness of our residency is that we're lucky enough to be doing this in Lisbon, which is such an attractive city right now. And the weather's great and the food is cheap. And, so people come for that experience as well. But I think so far we've been very successful in people being also very pleased and very committed to developing their work as artists. And we've had very wide-ranging results, and it's been a great challenge. I think you touched on a very interesting point, which is the hotel isn't ready yet, and so it's an interesting challenge also for artists to work on something that's site specific that doesn't exist yet. So it's an added challenge, but I think sometimes when you have limitations, it can produce more interesting results. So we've been extremely happy so far. We had a 2nd season last season also with people we had a Turkish artist, we had 2 artists from Paris and an artist from Hungary, and working from sculpture to textiles to glasswork and painting. And once again, the results were fantastic. And the more, at the end of each season, we create an exhibition with the artists' work, what they've developed in Lisbon so far, and it's a chance for us to also show what we're developing here with community in Lisbon. And also it creates opportunities for them to get to know the artist community in Lisbon. And so far the feedback's been great, and it's a project that's growing and evolving. So as we're in this pop-up stage, I think we're also learning, and things are always evolving. And we're now on our 3rd season, so we have another group of 4 artists that just arrived this beginning of May. And we have an open call for the next 3 seasons, which will be only 2 artists from now on. But it's been very exciting, and I think it's something where these kind of, not only our project, but the interest of artists in general, be it musicians, visual artists, video artists. I mean, all kinds of people in different areas really are from Europe and worldwide have been interested right now in Lisbon. I guess it's a very enticing city. There's things going on culturally. There's a lot happening, and you feel there's a real boom, which is also, I think, it's something it's been good for us because we have a lot of people interested in coming to explore this and to come and find out more about Lisbon and culture and Portuguese culture. Food, beaches, all these kind of great things.
Knowing that the first 3 seasons here are focused on bringing in artists from abroad, and I guess, having that sort of cultural exchange. I'm producing this series, I guess, for people who are coming to Lisbon, maybe who live here, who, want to get to know the culture, want to have that sort of, real cultural exchange. Don't just want to be tourists, don't just want to see all the usual things. So, really, who better to ask than yourself, and I guess drawing on the feedback and ideas that you maybe have received from those visitors. Yeah, I mean, would you just, I guess point some of the listeners towards, what are some of the kind of must-see or must-hit spots, or, just in terms of, could be food, could be art, just what are the things that sort of come to mind when I ask you about that?
Well, actually, there's a good number of artists that have been through the studio and they've participated in the projects that quite often ask me, they'll have a relative come over as well, or when they first arrive, and they'll be asking me, obviously, they want to know where some of the museums are, galleries and these kind of things, but also restaurants and beaches and spots like this to go. So I've been very much also working as a cultural guide for artists that come from abroad. And it's something that I've always enjoyed doing with artists in general, that are friends, people that come and visit. I'm always somebody that people will be, you should reach out to my friend. But I think Portugal is a small country, but it's astounding the completely different sceneries and completely different architecture and things that you can find in Portugal. So it's so varied, and that makes it very interesting, I think. As somebody that grew up here, although I'm British, I don't know if I mentioned that before, but I grew up in Portugal with also a French father, so this mix of cultures. But Portugal really brings this together, and it's a very welcoming country. In Lisbon, for example, there's a huge tourism boom, and obviously there are things that I would say to avoid, but there's places like Sintra which are beautifully amazing. It's like a fairy tale where you have the castle and all these great palaces, and it's really a place. It's very special. You have this complete. Everybody jokes it has its own microclimate where it's got its own weather, but it also has its own thing. It's really a very special place. So I would definitely recommend trying to go to Sintra, maybe avoid the busiest days, and even some of the most typical places like Belém, and you have the Contemporary Art Museum and things like this. But try to find maybe some of the restaurants and spots where all the locals go. That's really the way to go. So I could recommend any number of places, but having a drive down to maybe Comporta or the south coast of Lisbon. So if you drive from Lisbon to the Algarve, you take the Alentejo coast, which is called Costa Vicentina, and you just can explore beautiful villages, eat some great fish. This great. I mean, the beaches are wild, small villages, very nice people, great wine, great food. So that would be a recommendation for sure, is to take a little road trip out of Lisbon as well.
Having just arrived today, this very much feels like my kind of city, in the sense of, I would like to be sort of pointed towards almost a neighborhood, and a region, and you kind of say, all right, Lawrence, go and spend a couple of hours there, go and walk around, keep your eyes open for, who's doing what are the places that, local people are going into, and just, authentic places that you find, pretty much just walking on by foot, and, you're not necessarily going there to a specific place. It's actually more interesting for me to go to a neighborhood where you might have a cool coffee shop and a museum and a restaurant and all these things kind of all together. So I think I'd sort of almost, to me, and then also to the listener, maybe just, point me and us towards, what might be some areas that, are interesting, and neighborhoods that are interesting to kind of check out, and maybe just, go there without necessarily a specific destination in mind.
Well, I don't know if you've heard, but Lisbon is the city of the 7 hills. So although I would most definitely recommend that you walk around the city, so be prepared for some exercise, which is also great. I guess most Portuguese people don't need to be at the gym all the time. But I would recommend definitely, even though they're very popular neighborhoods, the old neighborhoods of Alfema, for example, where you could walk around and you can still find some of the very old restaurants and coffee shops and etc. And also all the new businesses that are booming. But it's a beautiful area to walk around. And then if you walk down from there, you can go to the Arroios area, which is Intendente, which used to be... It's an up and coming area, so it's extremely multicultural. It was not a very attractive area a few years ago, and now it's where you have a lot of young people, a lot of new cafes, new restaurants, a lot of very vibrant things happening. And you have projects in between there. You have Moradia, where you have projects like Cantina Popular da Moradia, which is a cooperative kind of restaurant where people get together, you have parties happening, but they also serve meals to less fortunate people in the neighborhood, and different projects, solidarity projects like this. You have also at the other side of the city, you have old neighborhoods like Madragoa, which is lesser known, but you can still find fantastic local Portuguese restaurants, as well as, for example, one of my favorite places, which is Italian Osteria. So also this multicultural aspect of Lisbon is you can still find some really, really fantastic, very typical Portuguese places, but also in the mix you'll find a very fantastic Japanese place or an Italian restaurant. But I think it's coming, this new wave of young people that are moving here, also opening their own businesses, and this great combination of what's happening. You have a neighborhood in Alcântara, which is also used to be quite this mix of industrial and big warehouses by the river, and right now you have all these big projects. There's Lisbon's village underground, kind of like London, and things like this. So this huge mix of old and new, I think, in Lisbon, which is extremely interesting, and it's worth trying to find out by yourself and walk around to find some of these places. If you're going to lunch anywhere between walking around Alfema, for example, if you want to experience the real Portuguese restaurant, where you'll have the businessman and the working man, and you go to Zé da Moradia and have some great codfish, or the dish of the day, and it's always packed in this tiny streets, and at the same time, then you might go to dinner and go for a new Japanese place in town, which will be with fish that's only from Azores or something like this, and then later you go to a bar where you have Portuguese people, and maybe it's run by a young German guy or something. So there's all this mix of things happening, and there's still a lot of authenticity, I think, in Lisbon. And one of the worries, I think, for a lot of people in Lisbon is that it might lose this with some, big boom of tourism. And I think what Lisbon really has to offer is that it still has a lot of authenticness to it, and the places where the locals go and really appreciate, and they also really like to show it, and they're very proud of it. And you know, sometimes the cheapest place is actually the best place, and this is still very real, and it still very much exists. And I think there's a fine balance between the new experiences that are being created in Lisbon and this tradition, because Portugal is very traditional at the same time.
Thank you so much to Nicolai for appearing on the podcast. It was super interesting to hear about the progress of the project, and it's something I'm definitely looking forward to seeing develop. I've left below all of the details of THIRDBASE residency program, their website and main social media handles. And of course, why not follow along with me on social media, where I'm at Interpreting Wine on Instagram and Facebook, at Wine Podcast on Twitter, and email hello@interpretingwine.com. We change the Lisbon focus from art to entrepreneurship next time. In episode 285, I'll be sitting down with Nathan Jakemin of the Nam Mushroom Farm. If you haven't already, please do subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss out on any future episodes from this series. See you next time.